This is our first episode since we saw Drake Maye show flashes of being the elite quarterback he was drafted to be. I want to start out with the good and the bad. Who do you think was the good and who stood out to you as a stud the preseason game for the Patriots Thursday night against the Eagles?
Yeah, I think you do have to start with Drake. He looks so much more comfortable. The ball, that probably the nicest play of the day for him. It doesn't look like anything when you look at the play-by-play, right? It's just an incomplete deep ball down the right sideline to Javon Baker. But when you really look at that throw, that is just, it couldn't have been better. And I talked to Javon Baker after the game, and he's like, it was a perfect ball, play I should have made. So you look at that, you look at, the kind of the mobility and everything that he showed. I think it was like 4 rushes, obviously had the touchdown run. That was really good. And then there was another there was a completion of Baker. I think it was on like a 3rd down, 3rd and 5-ish on Drake's first drive. And you could see him like going through his progressions. Like, he goes right, goes left. Then he goes, I think Javon was probably the 3rd read on that. And just to see him go through that, kind of to see him, set his feet on that play specifically, and then deliver a strike. There was like a lot of really encouraging signs, I think is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I agree with that. We saw the flashes. I don't think you can watch that game Thursday night and you can't say that Drake Maye was the good, was a standout. Mm-hmm. He came in and he said it on his very first drive, facing his very first 3rd down that night and getting actual quality reps. As Gerard Mayo always said, it's what it's about. It's not quantity, it's quality. These are actual quality reps that finally were rolling for him behind that first offensive line. He looked right. It was a 1-2 quick read. I also loved the scheme by Alex Van Pelt because it was an easy 1-2. It was a high out and then a shorter out into the flat. Then he went to his left and it was the inside cut or the inside, backside inside route on that dig by Baker. And it was just, the timing was perfect. It was drop back, 1-2 hitch, look left, hitch, throw, Baker comes down with it, and then move the chains. He looked composed. He looked on time. His footwork, everything was synced up. And then you mentioned that drop to Javon Baker. That was a 55-yard seed down the middle of the field from where Drake Maye released it behind the line of scrimmage to where Javon Baker dropped it 55 yards on the money. And it was a great anticipatory throw because Baker's not even fully breaking into his route over the middle of the field by the time Drake starts into his release to get that ball out. I think Baker, and again, this is what we'll get with chemistry. It's a preseason game. This is what you get. I think his route was a little extended, too much upfield. At that point, then he cut in. But when the timing gets down and the chemistry comes through for these guys, that's when it'll shine. But I loved that throw. And it was a flick of the wrist, Sean. Jacoby Brissett, Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi, they can't make that throw. Joe Milton can make that throw, but I don't think it'll be as accurate downfield. Just how easy it was for him. And he had 2 other throws to the sidelines on fly routes to Javon Baker. Both were incompletions, but same thing. One was precise. One was out of bounds. But the promise there is that it was out of bounds. It was only where his receiver can get it. He didn't have it hanging over the middle of the field where a safety coming over the top can pick it off. And the last great throw, I think, was that short completion of Mitchell Wilcox out in the left flat. Nolan Smith all in his grill. Kind of did a jumping, leaping side angle throw, but off platform, off balance. And again, I'll say it. If it was Mac Jones, Jacoby Brissett, they would have been buried into the turf by Nolan Smith, probably knocked out of the game. That's where you see Drake Maye operating off schedule with that throw to Wilcox. But we also saw him shine through going on schedule like that drop to Javon Baker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seeing those, and you just mentioned the kind of the throw where like a little jump throw, like it's hard to see that in the moment when it's happening. And to kind of see that surface on Twitter or something the next morning it's like, wow, that's a nice play. And he had a few of those.
Yeah, I think and then we'll see the processing still come along. There's the good, and we'll get into the bad player. I just want to go a little more on Drake Maye because I believe it deserves the attention because the entire future of this franchise for the next 5 to 10 years hangs on the fact if Drake Maye can be a good starting quarterback. Where we see the shortcomings is still like fumbled snaps. It's the little things. But he's doing the big things right. Like processing was my concern for him. But when you talk to Alex Van Pelt or Gerard Mayo or anyone in New England, they're excited because of his IQ and how quick he can make reads and read an NFL offense and defense. So that shined through. But then there's the fumbled snaps. Like we saw on a design toss play that he couldn't connect on. We've seen it in practice. We've seen it in games. How often do you see that from an actual starting quarterback in the NFL? Almost 0 times per season. It's very uncommon. It's a little things of him still getting used to being under center. But when he consistently can be under center, consistently have his footwork be maintained and his mechanics all throughout a game, once all of that comes together, that's when he'll be a starting quarterback. We'll see left and right tackle what happens there. But that to me is when we will know Drake Maye can actually be a starter and he will take the job from Jacoby Brissett. What about bad? Who is the bad to you on Thursday night?
I mean, if you want to stick with the quarterbacks, I think it's pretty clear that Jacoby Brissett was among those. I mean, that for a veteran guy, you know, he comes in kind of lauded as someone who doesn't turn the ball over, you know, doesn't make those types of mistakes. And for you to be in the red zone, you know, have pretty much an automatic 3 points on the board, and you to throw that red zone pick, you know, just forcing it, you know, for really no other reason than that. He was just forcing it to Austin Hooper. Avonte Maddox stepped right in, picked it off, took it, 45, 50 yards the other way to set up the Eagles with really good field position. I mean, that's a really bad play. That's a really bad mistake. And Gerard actually came out the next morning, on Friday morning, and talked about it. And he didn't pull any punches. He called it terrible. I got the quote right here. Yeah, it was just forcing the play. We had other guys open on that play. It was a poor play. It was a terrible play, and we can't have those, especially when you have guaranteed points on the board. So, I mean, it just felt like, we didn't know this at the time of the interception, but now, looking back on the game, you saw Drake, take steps forward. And so I certainly think that, Drake's performance combined with Brissett's performance, I mean, there's no doubt that Drake kind of tightened the gap a little bit, in those sorts of competitions. And he was the best quarterback for the Patriots, no doubt. And Jacoby Brissett, I would say, had a really down day.
Yeah, that was an awful interception by Jacoby Brissett. I mean, he's a veteran in the league. You said it, he's a guy that's lauded to, I think his interception rate is like sub 2% of his throws, which is great for an NFL quarterback. And Jacoby Brissett, his job is to keep the offense on schedule and keep them scoring points, whether that's 7 or 3. But a red area interception like that was just terrible. And you see why Jacoby Brissett is where he is, why he is a starting quarterback for the Patriots, but why he's been a journeyman. And like, if that continues, then they have to give it to Drake Maye. Like Jacoby Brissett's job is simple. Like keep this offense on schedule, teach Drake Maye the offense, but don't lose games. Like that's his job. Mm-hmm. That's who he is at this point. He is what he is. Drake Maye will continue to grow. That was just such a dumb throw all around. And especially in a preseason game, we're going against some of the backups on the Eagles. Like that's not even a full-fledged Eagles defense you were facing. It's inexcusable, but we'll see Jacoby Brissett if he even plays in the third preseason game. But most important is what he does week 1, week 2, week 3, when it's like Bengals, Seahawks, and they really get into the actual regular season. My bad, I went Javon Baker. So as much as we were talking about the connections, and we see Drake Maye targeting him, the drop on that deep route, but both his routes to the outside, those flies he ran, he got absolutely bodied and pushed out of bounds. Like bad release, bad technique, no strength. Drake Maye shouldn't have made any of those throws. So I'll even loop him into the bad. The bad was him looking like both deep attempts on the sideline of Javon Baker. That was predetermined. You can't do that in the NFL. Now, if it's a perfect read and you see there's going to be a bust in the coverage, of course, quick snap and get the ball out. But there was a Mitchell Wilcox underneath open, but maybe he was a 4th read. But you got to take what the defense gives you. But Javon Baker, there's got to be better fight, better release, better route running. You can't get bullied along the sidelines. It looked like Devontae Parker when he got absolutely thrown out the club against the Dolphins early last season. And it was one of the worst interceptions I've ever seen because that throw was made no matter what. Javon Baker is going to be very important for this offense. When Kendrick Bourne gets healthy and plays, or even before he returns, and for him to be a boundary receiver, a guy that is respected and expected to do a lot because of his catch radius, his body control along the sidelines, to get pushed around like that cannot happen. Now, of course, he's a long-term play, and he's a wide receiver 3 at most, in my opinion, but it was a bad showing by Javon Baker, who had flashes early in the season, but his preseason game played bad. But you could tell between Drake and Javon, like, that's his guy. That's probably been his guy all camp. That's been his guy behind closed doors when we can't even see if they're doing extra work away from practice. But you can't force it to him. If he's going to be your guy, Drake, he has to uphold his part of the bargain. He's got to run good routes and get separation and get open for you.